Emily Turner tossed from one side of the bed to the other, the sheets twisting around her legs. The clock on the nightstand blinked back at her 12:47 a.m. She sighed. Sleep wasn't coming tonight. The silence of the house felt heavier than ever, pressing down on her chest like a weight she couldn't shake off. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator down the hallway, and the faint creak of the old floorboards whenever the wind brushed against the windows. It was the same house she had lived in for over 20 years, yet lately it didn't feel like home. It felt like a waiting room, a place where something was missing, something she couldn't quite name aloud. Her husband, Mark, was supposed to return from a business trip the night before, but then he'd called late, claiming his flight was delayed. It wasn't the first time, that Emily suspected it wouldn't be the last. She told herself not to think too much, not to read into the excuses, but the ache in her stomach told another story. She rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling where the streetlight outside threw faint shadows. She remembered the years when she and Mark would talk late into the night, laughing about small things, making plans for the future. Now, silence stretched between them like a canyon too wide to cross. She reached for her phone on the nightstand. No messages. No good-night text. No call to ask how she was doing. Just the cold black screen. Emily set it back down and closed her eyes, willing herself to drift away into dreams, but her thoughts spun like wheels on ice. She thought about the first time she and Mark moved into this house, how alive it had felt then, how every corner had been filled with possibility. Now it felt hollow. She tried not to admit it, but most nights she felt lonelier here than she ever had in her life. A soft creak broke through the stillness. Emily's eyes flew open. She froze, her ears straining. The sound came from the hallway. For a moment, her heart raced with alarm. Was someone in the house? She held her breath, listening. Then she heard it again, a gentle shuffle of feet, slow, hesitant. The bedroom door creaked open just an inch, then a little wider. Her heart calmed when she saw a familiar figure standing there in the shadows. It was Daniel, her son. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Are you awake?" Emily pushed herself up against the pillows, blinking at him. He was 22 now, taller than she remembered every time she looked at him. Yet in that moment, he looked like a boy again, unsure, standing in her doorway. His hair was a mess from tossing on his own bed, and he rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, stepping into the room. His voice carried a weight she didn't expect, as though his restlessness went deeper than just a bad dream. Emily softened, patting the space beside her. "Come in," she said gently. Daniel crossed the room slowly and sat down at the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emily studied his face in the faint glow from the window. He had his father's eyes bright blue, though they looked tired now and her heart squeezed. She realized she hadn't had a real conversation with him in weeks. Not since he'd come back from college for the summer. He spent most of his days out with friends. And when he was home, the house felt more like a transit station than a place where anyone settled. "What's on your mind?" she asked softly. Daniel hesitated, his shoulders slumping as if he carried something heavy. "It just feels strange here, Mum," he said finally. "Like nothing's the same anymore." Emily's throat tightened. He had voiced what she had been feeling for so long. "Different how?" She pressed gently. He looked down at his hands. "Dad's never around, and you look so lonely all the time." "I don't know, I don't like it." His honesty cut deeper than anything else could have. Emily swallowed hard, fighting the urge to let her tears spill. She wanted to tell him she was fine, that he didn't need to worry about her. But the truth was written all over her life, in the late nights alone, in the dinners eaten in silence, in the way she stared too long at her phone waiting for messages that never came. She reached out and touched his shoulder gently, a small comfort. "I'll be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Marriage. It's complicated sometimes. Daniel looked up at her then, his expression soft but full of concern. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of everything she had been trying to hide, the loneliness, the quiet despair, the ache of being unseen in her own marriage. And in that moment, she realized her son had grown into someone who could see past the masks she wore. Emily sighed and leaned back against the headboard. She felt the weight of unspoken words pressing down on her chest, that she didn't want to burden him with her pain. Not yet. Instead, she closed her eyes for a second, letting the comfort of his presence fill the empty space Mark had left behind. It wasn't the same, of course, but it reminded her that she wasn't completely alone. Daniel shifted beside her, as though debating whether to say more. His hand clenched on his knee, and his jaw tightened. "Mum," he began, then stopped. He shook his head slightly, as if he wasn't sure how to continue. Emily opened her eyes, noticing his hesitation. "What is it?" she asked softly. He hesitated again, then gave a small, sad smile. I don't like seeing you this way. You've always been the strong one, the one holding everything together. I don't know what's going on with Dad, but I don't want to see you hurt." The words pierced her heart. For a moment, she thought she might break down, but she held it together. She reached over and squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "That means more than you know." Silence filled the room again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the heavy emptiness she had grown used to. It was warm, fragile, a reminder that despite everything, there was still love in this house. She leaned her head back, closing her eyes again, and let out a slow breath. The night stretched on, the silence broken only by the steady sound of Daniel's breathing beside her. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. Yet deep inside, Emily knew this was only the beginning. Something larger, something heavier was waiting to surface. She just didn't know what or when. And so, as the clock ticked closer to 1 a.m, Emily realized that her life, her family, her marriage, all of it was standing on the edge of something she couldn't yet see. Daniel sat at the edge of his mother's bed, his posture stiff, his fingers twisting together. Emily could see how restless he was, how the night had unsettled him. He wasn't the little boy who used to climb into her bed after a nightmare. Yet there was something about the way he hesitated that reminded her of those days. He looked older, stronger, but inside he carried a heaviness that made him seem so much younger in that moment. "I couldn't sleep," he said again, as if the words alone could explain everything. His voice was low, careful, like he was afraid to say too much. Emily adjusted the blanket around her, studying him in the dim light. The summer moon slipped through the curtain, brushing across his face. His eyes carried the same storm she had been feeling inside herself all night. She tried to read him, to understand what was really on his mind. "What's keeping you awake?" she asked softly. Daniel sighed and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "It's just being back here. It doesn't feel the same. When I was little, this house felt alive. Dad was always around, he was smiling. Everything felt safe. Now," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Now it feels empty. Like there's no one here, even when we're together." His words stung because they were true. Emily felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Things change," she whispered. "Life gets harder, and people get busy." Daniel turned to look at her, his jaw tightening. "Busy?" His voice cracked a little. "Is that what we're calling it?" Dad's never home, and when he is, he barely talks to you. To either of us. I see it, Mum. I see how it hurts you. Emily's breath caught. She had tried so hard to hide her feelings, to keep the pain tucked away so her children wouldn't notice. But Daniel was grown now. He saw everything, and hearing him say it aloud made the truth impossible to deny. I don't want you to worry about me, she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. You should be focusing on your own life, not mine. He shook his head quickly. How can I not worry? You're my mom. You've always been the one holding everything together. And now it feels like you're carrying everything alone. Emily looked down, blinking fast to keep her tears from falling. She wanted to be strong for him, to prove she could handle the loneliness, the silence, the cold distance that had taken over her marriage. But her son's words broke through her walls. For the first time, she realized she didn't need to pretend with him. I'm okay, she whispered, though the words felt fragile, like they could shatter at any moment. It's just, sometimes marriage doesn't turn out the way we dream it will. And sometimes the person you thought would always be there starts to drift away. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. He shouldn't treat you like this, he said firmly. You deserve better. Emily's chest ached. The fierceness in his voice reminded her of the boy who used to stand up for kids on the playground, the boy who couldn't bear to see anyone hurt. Now that same fire was turned toward her, and she didn't know whether to feel comforted or crushed. She let out a long breath and leaned back against the headboard. I appreciate you saying that, she murmured. But it's not always so simple. Your father and I, we have history, a family, years of memories. Walking away isn't easy, and holding on isn't easy either. Daniel looked at her, his face softening. I just hate seeing you unhappy. I wish I could fix it. The sincerity in his voice pierced her. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. You don't need to fix it, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Just being here tonight, talking to me, that's enough. It means more than you know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't heavy now. It was filled with unspoken love, a bond deeper than words. Emily realized how much she had missed this closeness, how much she needed it. Daniel shifted, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. You've always been strong, Mom, he said quietly. But you don't have to be strong all the time. Not with me. The words hit her heart with surprising force. She had spent so many years holding everything together, hiding her pain to protect her children. But now, sitting beside her grown son in the middle of the night, she realized she didn't have to pretend anymore. She smiled faintly, though her eyes were wet. You've grown up so much, she said softly. Sometimes I forget you're not a little boy anymore. Daniel gave a small, almost sad laugh. I still feel like a kid half the time. But seeing you like this, it makes me want to be stronger. For you. Emily's chest tightened with emotion. She wanted to tell him everything, to pour out the loneliness she had bottled up for years, but she held back. He had already seen enough. She didn't want to burden him with more than he could carry. Instead, she leaned slightly closer, her voice low and steady. Thank you, Daniel, for being here tonight, for reminding me I'm not as alone as I feel sometimes. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. You'll never be alone, Mom. Not while I'm here. The words wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and comforting. For the first time in months, she felt safe seen, even. And though she knew the road ahead with Mark was uncertain, she realized she had something unshakable right beside her. The love of her son. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the steady rhythm of their breathing, the quiet bond of two people carrying the same pain. Facing it together, Emily closed her eyes, letting the comfort sink in. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, she allowed herself to believe in the strength of love, the kind that survives even when everything else falls apart. And as the night stretched on, Emily and Daniel sat side by side, caught between the shadows of the past and the uncertain light of what was yet to come. Daniel sat quietly at the edge of the bed, his shoulders hunched, his eyes lowered. The faint glow from the window revealed the shadows under his eyes, the kind that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy thoughts. Emily studied him closely, realizing just how much her son had changed since leaving for college. He was older now, sharper in the way he spoke, but his face still carried pieces of the boy who once ran through this house with laughter in his voice. Tonight, though, there was no laughter. He lifted his gaze at last, and Emily froze. His eyes, those deep blue eyes so much like Mark's, were filled with something raw, something unguarded. "It feels strange, Mom," he said quietly. "Coming home doesn't feel like it used to. The house feels different." Emily tilted her head. "Different how?" she asked gently, though she was almost afraid to hear his answer. Daniel leaned back slightly, his voice low but steady. "It feels empty. Dad's never around. And when he is, he acts like this house is just a stop on his way to somewhere else. And you," he paused, swallowing hard, "you look so lonely all the time. Like you're here, but you're not really living." The words struck Emily straight in the chest. She wanted to deny it, to say he was wrong, but she couldn't. He had seen too much. Her son wasn't a child anymore. He could read her like an open book. She forced a weak smile. "I'm fine, Daniel. Really, things just change as people get older." But he didn't buy it. His jaw tightened, and his voice carried a quiet anger she had never heard from him before. "You shouldn't have to pretend, Mom. I know you're not fine." The silence between them deepened. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as memories of the past flooded her mind. She remembered nights years ago when Mark would come home early, carrying flowers or her favorite coffee, when the air in the house buzzed with love and laughter. Now those memories felt like shadows, fading further away each year. Emily reached out slowly and touched her son's arm. "Marriage isn't always what you think it will be," she whispered. "Sometimes people grow apart. Sometimes they forget how to love the way they used to." Daniel looked at her, his expression softening but still full of hurt. "But you don't deserve that. You've given everything to this family. And now you sit here waiting for him to come back, like your life depends on it. Doesn't that hurt?" Emily swallowed, her throat tight. She didn't want to admit how much it hurt. She didn't want to say aloud how many nights she cried quietly in the dark, or how she stayed awake wondering if her husband's heart still belonged to her. She forced herself to stay calm. "I try not to think about it too much," she said softly. "It's easier that way." But Daniel wasn't ready to let it go. "It's not fair, Mom. You're here, carrying all this pain, and he's out there like none of it matters. You deserve someone who sees you, who cares." The words made Emily's chest ache. She looked at him, and in that moment, she didn't just see her son. She saw a man who understood her pain, who recognized the pieces of her heart she tried to hide from the world. His eyes shone with empathy, with love, with a loyalty that both comforted her and broke her at the same time. She tried to gather her strength, to keep the conversation from spiraling into something heavier. "Daniel," she said, her voice gentle, "you don't need to carry this for me. You have your own life to live, your own dreams to chase." But he shook his head firmly. "I can't just ignore it. You're my mom. You've always been there for me. Now it's my turn to be here for you." Emily's lips trembled. She wanted to tell him she didn't need saving, but the truth was, she did. Not from Mark's absence, not even from the loneliness, but from the silence that had swallowed her whole. Tonight, for the first time in so long, she felt heard. She sat back against the pillows, her hand still resting on Daniel's arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know how much that means to me." Daniel gave a small nod, but his eyes told her he wanted to say more. He hesitated, shifting on the bed, his hand tightening into a fist and then relaxing again. "What is it?" Emily asked, noticing his unease. He exhaled slowly, his voice low and steady. "I saw Dad last week, when I came into town a day early. I didn't tell you because I didn't know how." Emily's stomach dropped. Her heart raced as she sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" Daniel's gaze flickered, filled with something heavier than before. He wasn't alone. The words hung in the air like a sharp blade. Emily's breath caught, and she felt her chest tighten, as though the room itself had closed in on her. She stared at her son, searching his face, hoping she had misunderstood. But Daniel's eyes told her everything. He had seen something she had feared deep inside, but never dared to confront. She gripped the blanket in her lap, her knuckles pale. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Tell me exactly what you saw." His silence was answer enough. Emily's world tilted, the room suddenly too small, too heavy. Her husband's absence, the cold phone calls, the excuses about late meetings, all of it clicked into place. She felt the air rush from her lungs, leaving her hollow. She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth, trying to hold herself together. But the truth was clawing its way out, breaking through the walls she had built for years. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't being paranoid. Mark had betrayed her. And now, sitting in the quiet darkness of her bedroom, Emily realized everything she had feared was no longer a shadow. It was real. Her son had seen it, and nothing would ever be the same again. Emily sat frozen, her son's words echoing in her ears. The silence in the room was thick, heavier than anything she had ever felt before. Daniel's eyes were steady on hers, filled with worry and sadness. He had given her the truth she had feared for so long, and now it lay between them like a storm they couldn't escape. She tried to form words, but her throat tightened. Her heart thudded in her chest, every beat reminding her of the life she had built with Mark. The years of laughter, the family dinners, the promises whispered in the dark. All of it now felt fragile, as though one wrong breath would shatter it completely. Emily forced herself to breathe. She reached for Daniel's shoulder, needing something solid, something real to hold on to. Her hand trembled as she touched him. "I'll be fine," she whispered, though her voice cracked. "It's just, marriage is complicated." Daniel leaned closer, his brows furrowed. "Complicated doesn't mean broken, Mom. He made a choice. And it's hurting you." The honesty in his words cut through her like glass. She wanted to defend Mark, to explain away his actions, but the image of him with another woman, someone who wasn't her, burned in her chest. She closed her eyes, pressing her lips together, trying to contain the storm raging inside her. For years, she had carried this marriage on her shoulders. She had given Mark patience, forgiveness, and countless second chances. But now, with the truth spoken aloud, she realized how heavy it had all become. She wasn't sure how much longer she could carry it. "I never wanted you to see me like this," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I never wanted you to carry this pain with me." Daniel shook his head. "You don't have to do it alone. Not anymore." She opened her eyes, and for the first time in months, she felt something break inside her, not from despair, but from the release of finally being seen. All this time she had been invisible in her own marriage, but here, in the dim glow of her bedroom, Her son looked at her with a tenderness she had forgotten existed. Her chest tightened with emotion. She wasn't alone in this moment, and that realization filled her with both comfort and sorrow. She reached up and brushed her hand against his cheek, the way she used to when he was a boy. "You've grown into such a kind man," she said softly. "Stronger than I ever imagined." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line, and his eyes glistened. "I learned it from you, Mom. You've been strong my whole life. But it's okay to let someone else be strong for you now." His words hit harder than she expected. She had spent so many years keeping her heart locked away, believing she had to endure everything in silence. Yet here was her son, offering her the very thing she had longed for. Understanding, support, and love without conditions. Emily leaned back against the headboard, the weight of exhaustion settling on her shoulders. "It's not just about me," she said after a long pause. "There's you, and your sister, and the life we've built together. If I let myself fall apart, what happens to all of that?" Daniel moved closer, his voice steady. "What happens if you keep pretending? How long can you keep this inside before it breaks you completely?" The question hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Emily felt the truth of it in her bones. She had been breaking piece by piece for years, holding on to a marriage that was slipping through her fingers no matter how tightly she tried to cling. Her chest ached, and tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know how much more I can give." Daniel reached for her hand, gripping it firmly. "Then don't give it all to him anymore. Save something for yourself. You deserve that much." His words warmed her heart, even as pain lingered. She had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. To have someone remind her she mattered too. In Mark's absence, she had started to believe she was invisible. But Daniel's gaze held her steady, pulling her back to herself. Emily squeezed his hand, her voice breaking. "Thank you for telling me the truth. I don't know what I'll do yet, but at least now. I can't keep lying to myself." Daniel nodded slowly, his expression soft. "Whatever you decide, I'll be here. Always." The silence that followed was fragile, filled with both pain and a quiet strength. Emily's heart ached, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely powerless. She still didn't have answers, but she had a truth she couldn't ignore and a bond she could hold on to. She looked at Daniel again, and in his face, she saw a reflection of everything she had been missing: compassion, loyalty, and love that didn't waver. For a brief moment, she felt herself breathe easier. She wasn't ready to face what came next, but she knew she wasn't facing it alone. Emily leaned her head against the wall behind her bed, closing her eyes. The night was far from over, and her heart was heavier than it had ever been. But with her son beside her, she felt a fragile thread of hope. She whispered into the stillness, more to herself than to him, "Maybe it's time I start seeing things for what they are." Daniel didn't speak. He just held her hand, his presence quiet but steady, the kind of strength she had needed for so long. And as the night stretched into silence again, Emily realized something important. Love had not disappeared from her life completely. It had simply changed its shape, moving from the space of a broken marriage into the unshakable bond between a mother and her son. It wasn't the love she thought she would grow old with, but in that moment, it was enough to keep her heart beating, enough to remind her she was still alive. The room felt colder after Daniel's words. Emily sat still, her fingers trembling against the blanket, her mind racing in circles she couldn't control. For a moment, she wanted to believe she had missed him. That exhaustion had twisted his words. But Daniel's face, solemn and unshaken, told her the truth. Her breath came shallow, her voice barely there. "What did you see, Daniel?" He hesitated, looking down at his hands as though the details themselves were too heavy to carry. I wasn't trying to spy on him, he began, his voice rough with emotion. I got into town early. I thought I'd surprise you. On the way, I stopped for coffee at that cafe near the airport. That's where I saw him. Emily's chest tightened. She knew the cafe. Mark used to take her there when they were younger, when life felt light and full of promise. The thought of him being there now, with someone else, sent a sharp ache through her heart. Daniel continued, his tone careful but honest. He was sitting by the window, not alone. There was a woman with him. They weren't just two people having coffee. They were close. Too close. He looked happy with her. Happier than I've seen him in a long time. The words cut deep, deeper than she expected. Emily pressed her lips together, trying to hold herself steady. Are you sure? She asked, her voice cracking with desperation. Daniel lifted his eyes, and in them she saw both pain and certainty. I wish I wasn't. But yes, I'm sure. Silence wrapped around them, heavy and suffocating. Emily felt her world tilt, the ground slipping beneath her feet. All the late night, excuses, the business trips, the way Mark's eyes no longer lingered on hers, it all made sense now. She had been pushing her doubts away, convincing herself she was imagining things. But her son's words had ripped away the last veil of denial. Her throat burned as tears gathered, but she fought them back. She didn't want to cry in front of him, not now. Why didn't you tell me earlier? She asked quietly. Daniel's face twisted with guilt. Because I didn't want to hurt you. I thought maybe I was wrong, that maybe it didn't mean anything. But when I saw you tonight, how alone you looked, I couldn't keep it inside anymore. You deserve the truth, even if it hurts. Emily's heart ached at his words. Her son had been carrying this secret for days, protecting her while she carried her own silent wounds. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I'm glad you told me, she whispered. Even if it hurts, I needed to know. Daniel's grip tightened, his voice firm. I don't know what he's doing, Mom. But I do know this, you don't deserve to be treated that way. You've given everything to this family, and he should see that. If he doesn't, that's on him, not you. Emily let the words sink in, but the pain inside her only grew. For years she had built her world around Mark, trusting in the vows they had made, the promises they whispered when they were young. Now all of it felt like a story she had been telling herself, one that no longer matched reality. She leaned back, pressing a hand to her chest as if to steady her heart. I don't even know what to feel right now, she admitted. Anger, sadness, betrayal. It's all mixed together. Daniel nodded slowly. You don't have to figure it all out tonight. Just let yourself feel it. Don't pretend it doesn't hurt. The tears she had been holding back finally slipped free. They rolled down her cheeks, warm against the coldness spreading through her. She didn't sob, didn't wail, just quiet tears, the kind that came when the truth was too heavy to carry. Daniel's hand moved to her shoulder, steady and strong. I'm here, he said softly. Whatever happens next, you won't go through it alone. Emily turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. She saw the sincerity there, the unshakable loyalty of a son who had grown into a man too quickly, because life demanded it. His words didn't erase the pain, but they gave her something else, strength. She wiped her tears, her voice trembling but firm. Thank you for telling me, for standing with me. I don't know what comes next, but I know I can't keep living in the dark. Daniel gave her a small, encouraging nod. One step at a time, Mom. That's all you need to do. The clock ticked softly in the background, filling the silence that followed. Emily's thoughts raced through years of memories, holidays, anniversaries, birthdays, moments when she thought love was unshakable. Now those memories felt distant, fragile, almost like someone else's life. She took a slow breath, realizing something important. The betrayal wasn't just about Mark's actions. It was about the years she had lost, the dreams she had held onto, even as they slipped away. But she wasn't powerless. She still had a choice in how she moved forward. Emily looked back at her son, her voice steadier now. I don't know what I'll do yet, but I promise you this, I won't ignore it anymore. I won't keep pretending everything's fine. Daniel's eyes softened with relief. That's all I wanted, Mom, for you to see your worth again. You're stronger than you think. The words lingered in the air, wrapping around her like a fragile shield. Emily leaned against the headboard, exhausted but strangely lighter. The truth hurt, but it had also freed her. She could no longer deny what was happening, but she could decide what to do with it. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the weight of the night settle. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was drowning alone. Her son had seen her pain, and instead of turning away, he had stepped closer. That bond, that quiet love, gave her hope in the middle of her heartbreak. When she opened her eyes again, the room looked the same soft shadows. Pale moonlight, but something inside her had shifted. The walls that had once felt like a prison now felt like a place of truth. Painful, yes. The honest Emily took another breath, whispering into the silence. Maybe this is where it begins. Not the end of everything, but the beginning of something new. Daniel squeezed her hand again, his voice low but steady. Whatever it is, you won't face it alone. I promise. And in that promise, Emily felt the first flicker of strength returning to her. Small but steady, like a flame refusing to die out in the dark. Emily sat with her hands pressed against her face, as though hiding could make the truth disappear. But nothing could erase the image her son had painted. Nothing could take away the sting of knowing her husband had given his smile, his time, his heart to someone else. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to confront Mark that very second. But all she could do was sit in silence. Her chest rose and fell unevenly, her breath sharp and shallow. Daniel watched her closely, his face twisted with concern. He didn't rush her, didn't press her for words. Instead, he shifted closer, his presence steady beside her. The quiet stretched on, but unlike before, it wasn't hollow, it was heavy with pain, the kind that filled the room until it became impossible to ignore. At last, Emily lowered her hands, her eyes red and wet. She blinked, willing her tears to stop, but more slipped free. Why would he do this to us? She whispered, her voice breaking. After everything we've been through, after all these years. Why? Her words cracked the stillness like glass. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight of her, his mother, the woman who had always been his source of strength, now trembling, broken by the weight of betrayal. He wanted to take the pain away, but he knew he couldn't. All he could do was be the anchor she so desperately needed. You're not alone, Mum, he said softly, his voice steady despite the storm in his eyes. You still have me. Emily turned to him, her lips trembling. She had heard those words before in different forms, from friends, from family, but tonight they felt different. They came from her son, spoken with a conviction that pierced through the fog of despair. She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly, as though it were the only thing keeping her from sinking. The tears came harder now, but she didn't fight them. For years, she had hidden her pain behind a smile, pretending everything was fine, but in this moment, she let it all out. Her sobs were quiet, muffled but raw. Daniel stayed still, holding her hand, his thumb brushing gently against her skin in silent reassurance. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. When Emily finally calmed, she leaned back against the headboard, her body drained. She wiped at her face with the sleeve of her nightgown, embarrassed by her own weakness. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I shouldn't fall apart like this in front of you." Daniel shook his head quickly. "Don't apologize. You're human, Mom. You've carried this family for so long. You're allowed to break sometimes." His words struck her, not because they were new, but because they came from him. Her son, the boy she had raised, was now the one reminding her she didn't have to be unshakable all the time. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Part of me wants to pretend I never heard this, to go on like nothing's wrong, because facing it feels too big, too heavy. But another part of me wants to scream at him, demand to know why he chose someone else over us." Daniel's expression hardened. "You don't have to decide tonight. But you deserve the truth, Mom. Don't let him keep you in the dark anymore." Emily nodded faintly, though her heart was still torn. She had built a life with marked decades of memories, 2 children, countless shared moments. The idea of letting it all go felt like cutting off a piece of herself. Yet the thought of staying, knowing his heart belonged elsewhere, felt unbearable. She tilted her head back, staring at the ceiling as if the answer might be written there. "I don't even recognize him anymore," she whispered. "The man I married. He was kind, devoted, full of dreams. Where did he go?" Daniel's hand tightened around hers. Maybe he changed. Or maybe he just stopped appreciating what he had. That doesn't mean you've lost yourself. You're still here. You're still the woman who raised me, who held this family together when no one else could. Don't let his choices take that away from you." His voice was steady, calm, but inside Emily could see the storm brewing. He wasn't just angry at Mark. He was hurting for her, carrying a weight that wasn't his to bear. The realization made her heart ache. "You shouldn't have to be the one saying these things to me," she said softly. "I should be the one comforting you, not the other way around." Daniel shook his head. "That's what family is, Mom. Sometimes you carry me, sometimes I carry you. Tonight it's my turn." The simplicity of his words undid her. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder, her body trembling with quiet sobs. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just wrapped his arm around her and held her close. In that embrace, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. It wasn't the safety of a husband's arms, the kind of love she once believed unbreakable. It was the safety of knowing she wasn't invisible, that someone saw her pain and refused to turn away. It was a reminder that love still existed in her life, even if it wasn't the kind she thought she would grow old with. Slowly, the sobs faded. Emily pulled back, her eyes swollen but steadier. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with sincerity. "For being here, for not letting me fall apart alone." Daniel gave her a small smile, though his eyes were still heavy with worry. "Always, Mom. Always." They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was the silence of shared pain, of unspoken promises, of a bond that had grown stronger in the fire of heartbreak. Emily leaned back, exhaustion settling deep in her bones, but for the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. Her marriage might have been unraveling, her heart breaking, but in the middle of it all, she had discovered a truth she couldn't ignore. She wasn't truly alone. Not as long as her son was by her side. And as the night wore on, she allowed herself a fragile thought, one she hadn't dared to hold before, that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this storm. The next morning arrived with a dull grey sky, the kind that mirrored Emily's heart. She woke with a heaviness in her chest, her thoughts circling the same painful truth. Mark's betrayal wasn't just a suspicion anymore, it was a wound that had been named and confirmed. The house felt colder than usual, too big, too empty, though Daniel's quiet presence down the hall gave her some sense of strength. Moved slowly through the motions of making coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she set the mug on the counter. The kitchen, once filled with laughter and warmth, felt like a stranger's place. Every corner held a memory of Mark. Every chair carried the echo of his absence. Daniel entered the room, his hair messy from sleep, his eyes filled with unspoken concern. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" he asked gently. Emily shook her head, forcing a weak smile. "No, my mind wouldn't stop." He pulled out a chair, sitting across from her, his gaze steady. "Do you want to talk about it?" Her lips parted, then closed again. She wanted to pour everything out, her anger, her heartbreak, her fear, but the words felt too heavy. Instead, she asked, "Do you think I should confront him?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He leaned back, crossing his arms as he thought. "If you're ready for the truth, then yes. But you need to be prepared for whatever he says. Once you ask, there's no going back." The thought made her stomach twist. What if Mark denied it? What if he admitted it? Either way, her world would never be the same. She stared down at her coffee, the steam rising like a fragile whisper. "I'm scared," she confessed. Daniel's voice softened. "You're stronger than you think, Mom. You've faced harder things before. This won't break you." His words gave her a flicker of courage. She realized she couldn't keep living in silence, pretending everything was fine while her heart fell apart. For years she had buried her doubts, convincing herself that loyalty meant endurance. But now she knew loyalty also meant honesty, and Mark had broken that. By late afternoon, the decision was made. She would confront him. She couldn't wait for answers to fall into her lap. She had to demand them. When evening came, Emily sat in the living room, the lights dim, the clock ticking loudly on the wall. Daniel stayed nearby, not intruding, but ready if she needed him. Every car sound outside made her tense, her pulse racing as she waited for Mark to return. Finally, the sound of the front door opening cut through the silence. Mark stepped inside, his expression tired but casual, as though nothing was wrong. He hung his coat, dropped his bag, and glanced toward the living room. "You're still up?" he asked lightly. Emily's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. "We need to talk, Mark." Something in her tone made him pause. His eyes flickered, narrowing slightly. "About what?" She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down." He hesitated, then slowly lowered himself into the chair, his shoulders stiff. "What's going on?" Emily's throat felt dry, but she pushed the words out. "I know about her." For a moment, Mark's face went blank. Then he tried to recover, a small, forced laugh escaping his lips. "Her? What are you talking about?" Emily's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Don't lie to me, Mark. Daniel saw you. At the cafe. With her. He saw how close you were. I can't ignore it anymore." The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his jaw tightening. For the first time, he didn't have an excuse ready. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. "Just tell me the truth," she pleaded. "Don't make me beg for honesty." Mark looked away, his hands clasped tightly together. His voice, when it came, was low and heavy. "I didn't plan for it to happen." Her chest ached, her worst fear confirmed. She pressed a hand against her lips, holding back a sob. "How long?" she whispered. He hesitated, then finally answered. "A few months." The room spun around her, every word cutting deeper. A few months. All those nights he claimed to be working late, all those empty weekends he had been with someone else. Emily closed her eyes, her tears falling freely now. Why, Mark? Why would you do this to me? To us? His face twisted with guilt, but his words offered no comfort. I don't know. I felt distant, lonely. Things between us haven't been the same. I didn't mean to hurt you, Emily. I swear I didn't. Her chest heaved, anger rising through the heartbreak. You didn't mean to. You chose this. You chose her. Over and over again, while I sat here waiting for you. Mark dropped his head into his hands, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. The sight of him crumbling didn't bring relief. It only deepened her sorrow. The man she had built her life with, the man she trusted completely, had betrayed her. Nothing he said could erase that. Daniel stepped into the room then, his expression guarded. He didn't say a word, but his presence was enough. Emily drew strength from him, standing a little taller as she wiped her tears. I don't know what comes next, she told Mark, her voice trembling but firm. But I know this: I won't live in lies anymore. I deserve more than half-truths and empty apologies. Mark lifted his head, his eyes red. Emily, please. Don't give up on us. Her heart cracked at his words, but she stood her ground. You gave up on us first. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's shoulders slumped, his regret spilling across his face, but Emily couldn't find it in herself to comfort him. The pain was too raw, the betrayal too fresh. She turned toward Daniel, who gave her the smallest nod of support. And in that moment, Emily realized something powerful. Even if her marriage was broken, even if the future was uncertain, she still had love in her life. It wasn't the kind she had once dreamed of, but it was strong, pure, and unshakable. The night ended not with resolution, but with clarity. Emily knew the road ahead would be hard, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. And that truth, fragile as it was, gave her the strength to face whatever came next. The house was silent after the confrontation. Mark had retreated to the guest room, leaving Emily alone in the living room with Daniel by her side. The air felt heavy, as though every corner of the house carried the weight of what had just happened. Emily sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped together tightly, her mind spinning with emotions she could barely name. She felt broken, but strangely she also felt lighter. The truth had been spoken aloud. No more wondering, no more excuses, no more pretending. Mark had admitted it, and though the pain was sharp, there was also a strange clarity in knowing. Daniel sat quietly, not pressing her with questions, simply being there. His presence filled the emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. After a long silence, Emily finally spoke. I don't know if I can forgive him. Daniel looked at her, his expression soft. You don't have to decide that right now. Forgiveness isn't something you owe him. It's something you choose if you ever want to. And if you don't, that's okay too. Emily nodded, letting his words settle. She realized how much she had leaned on her son during these past 2 nights, how he had given her strength she didn't know she had. She wasn't used to being the one who needed saving, but Daniel had stepped in without hesitation. It humbled her and healed her in ways she hadn't expected. The next morning, Emily stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, staring at her reflection. Her eyes were tired, her face pale, but beneath it all, she saw something else, a flicker of resilience. She wasn't the same woman who had gone to bed 2 nights ago, full of unspoken doubts and unacknowledged pain. She was stronger now, even if she still felt broken. Mark entered the room quietly. His eyes were heavy with guilt, his shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of his choices. Emily, he said softly, please, can we talk? She turned to face him, her heart aching at the sight of the man she once loved so completely. What is there to say, Mark? You made your choice. He stepped closer, his voice trembling. I was wrong. I let myself drift away. But it didn't mean I stopped loving you. Emily's throat tightened, but she shook her head. You don't do what you did to someone you love. You don't break their trust. You don't leave them waiting in an empty house while you give your heart to someone else. His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Emily almost reached out to him. But she stopped herself. She couldn't let pity blur the truth. Love was more than words. It was action. And his actions had destroyed everything they built. I don't know if we can fix this, she said finally, her voice steady. I don't know if I want to. Mark's face crumbled, but he didn't argue. He only nodded, his silence an admission of guilt. Then he turned and left the room, leaving Emily staring at her reflection once more. Later that evening, Emily sat outside on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, a kind of beauty that made her chest ache. Daniel joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her, then sat beside her. You've always loved sunsets, he said gently. She smiled faintly. They remind me that endings can still be beautiful. They sat together, sipping tea in silence until Emily finally spoke. I don't know what comes next. Maybe divorce. Maybe trying to rebuild. But I know one thing, I can't keep living in silence. I won't let myself disappear in someone else's story. Daniel's eyes softened. Whatever you choose, I'll be here. Always. Emily turned to him, her heart swelling with gratitude. You've grown into such a good man. Better than I could have ever hoped. Thank you for reminding me who I am. Tears filled Daniel's eyes, though he blinked them back. You don't have to thank me. You're my mom. You've given me everything. It's my turn to give something back. The sun dipped lower, and Emily felt something shift inside her. The pain was still there, sharp and heavy, but it no longer defined her. She realized she had been measuring her worth by Mark's love for too long. Now, she wanted to measure it by her own strength, her own choices, her own heart. When night finally came, Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought of the years behind her, the sacrifices, the laughter, the trust. She thought of the betrayal that had shattered it all. But then she thought of Daniel, his unwavering support, his steady hand, his love that never wavered. And she realized that even in her heartbreak, she wasn't lost. She whispered into the quiet, words meant only for herself. This is not the end of me. This is the beginning. And for the first time in a long while, she believed it. The days ahead would be difficult. Decisions would need to be made. Pain would resurface. But Emily knew she had the courage to face it. She had her son by her side. And she had herself wounded. Yes, but unbroken. The story of her marriage might be ending, but the story of her life was far from over. And in that truth she found hope.